Hey guys, welcome back to another Swords and Magic and Stuff devlog. We've been pretty slow on devlogs lately, and honestly kind of lazy as far as the quality of the devlog content goes. So this week I wanted to take a step away from development for a bit and put some time into a better video. A big thanks to Arrow for taking on a lot more editing work this month as well. But before we get started with the devlog, I want to take a moment to thank all of our amazing Patreon supporters who help us keep this game going. I know they're just in it for the cool merch, secret updates, and to get their character names in the game, but their support is the only reason we don't have to sell our souls to sponsors like Raid or Nord every single devlog, and I think you guys probably appreciate that as much as we do. Anyway, on to the devlog. So this last week, the team's been working toward the next game update, which is supposed to be our major combat overhaul. Unfortunately, we've had a bit of a setback and things are being shuffled around a bit. First of all, if you haven't already heard from the development digest we post each week on Steam, Kickstarter, Discord, and Patreon, a couple weeks ago, Joe was offered a position at another indie studio and has chosen to focus his efforts there, requiring him to step down as our animator and AI programmer. We're really sad to see him go, and we wish him the best of luck with his future endeavors. This is going to put us in a pretty tight spot considering the next update relied heavily on a bunch of combat and ability animations, not to mention the next zone requiring all new creatures and AI for them. For the time being, Lewis and I are planning on stepping up and learning more about the AI system, and we're probably going to have to revert back to our old method of implementing animations for creatures by reskinning marketplace animations. I might actually make a whole video on that. If you guys want to hear more, just leave it in the comments below. This is a method we've talked about before, and that saved us a ton of time and effort, and while it really limits what creatures we can make, we do have a few ideas on how to stretch the process just a bit further. Luckily, Joe left us with some great tools for our humanoid AI, with a pretty powerful NPC editor interface and an easy way to implement new attacks and abilities for NPCs. This week I did a deep dive into how the system works so I could start adding new abilities to our NPCs. Our NPCs use a series of behavior trees to determine what they do when they see an enemy or an ally, what to do when they get attacked, etc. Once in a combat state, the NPCs use attack sequences based on cooldowns and priorities to determine which attacks they want to do. These attack sequences don't get super complicated, so we can't exactly build boss fights from it, since there aren't phases or anything other than basic attacks. But with this, we can build some basic attack patterns for basic enemies. My first attempt at playing with this was just simply modifying a ranged attack Joe had already set up for us. I made it into a triple shot to see how it worked, and I was pretty relieved to see that each arrow simply spawns a projectile class. This is good news because it means that I can build custom projectile classes for things like fireballs, ice shards, or even more complicated spells like AoEs or debuffs in a blueprint. Then the AI will simply use the ability on cooldown, triggered by an animation notify. Notifies are pretty amazing little classes you can use that get triggered when the animation hits a certain point in a montage. To learn more about them, I decided to build a hacky little heal notify that triggers after the animation plays. Then the notify runs an activation event that traces for all pawns in the area and detects if they're friendly, if they're under full health, and then sorts all the pawns found based on health percentage, returning the lowest health ally from the trace. Next, I simply call our apply damage node and input a negative damage factor. In our NPC editor, we can set the max damage an enemy can do. So in this case, these guys can do 15 damage, and I want them to heal for a portion of that damage. About 80% should do for now. This was really only a test to see what I could get away with using the system, so in the future, Lewis will probably build a heal function and a way for NPCs to actually target allies in their behavior tree instead of this duct tape solution. Because this solution relies on the enemy targeting the player or another non-allied NPC to perform an action, it doesn't lend well to future applications. If we can build an ally targeting option where NPCs have the ability to buff their friends, it means we can add in more and more montage abilities like this for things like buffing defense, attack damage, speed, applying auras, or even resurrecting their friends. These behaviors, coupled with more and more complex attacks and spells, means we can build some very interesting humanoid AI. The current NPCs in the game only really run to you and do very untelegraphed attacks or stand at a range and fire arrows, which is much better than the melee counterparts since you can actually see the attack coming and dodge it. But these new abilities give us a chance to use more animations with windups to give players a better chance to anticipate the attacks and ultimately dodge them. Alright, so now that I'm satisfied with how to build new abilities for humanoids, and I'm confident that our NPC enemies will be interesting enough to get through the rest of the game, it's time to get back to my actual scheduled tasks. Because of the team shakeup, last week we decided that we needed to bide some time while we figure out how to accomplish the combat refactor without Joe. That shuffled our priorities around a bit, and we decided that we should release a quality of life update first while we weigh our options. I can't spoil everything in the update, but I will reveal that Lewis has been working on a procedural, repeatable quest generator for job boards that you can find in each town. I quickly knocked out a couple models for the job board listings, and then I whipped up some new rubble piles Wendy's been asking for so she can keep working on a new crypt in the Windless Woods. Now I can get to my stuff. This week I'm working on finally finishing up and replacing all the maps for the existing zones. Then I'll be starting on a new map for Windless Woods. A few months ago I found myself in a YouTube rabbit hole learning about how to draw RPG maps for D&D and other tabletop RPGs. And I decided that I wanted to adapt a style like this for Swords and Magic, so players could utilize the maps to find their way around the world. Our current map of Azura was made by Kitsune, and it is gorgeous. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have a lot of detail and doesn't really represent where you can and can't go in the world based on mountains and such. While we aren't in the business of holding players' hands, we do understand that players do need some sort of tools they can use to find where they're going, and a detailed map is a good way to do that. Alright, so the next thing for this week was some of the new Windless Woods storyline. A while back, Wendy and I sat down and brainstormed some ideas for a storyline to bring you through the island of Azura, the first zone in the game. We decided that each zone should have a storyline the player can follow if they want a more linear, direct approach to the game. We don't want it to be a main storyline, but an overarching story for the area that explains the zone, its history, the lore, the key elements, and some of the key NPCs in the zone. It'll be a way to introduce the players to all the important locations and set them exploring as they go through the area. This is something most games do, it's nothing new, but we originally thought we could sidestep it and let players just explore the world on their own. Unfortunately, a lot of players don't really understand that concept because it's never really done in RPGs. Games like Minecraft or survival games, sure, but in RPGs with towns and quests and characters, players expect the game to lead them through, and we're getting a lot of flack for that in our Steam reviews. So ultimately we caved and decided that a mostly isolated storyline in each zone was a good idea and something that would only add to the value of our game. Of course, the Azura storyline is a ways off because we're trying really hard not to go back there until we have to. We really want to introduce new zones as soon as possible to keep heading toward that 1.0 release, but we'll eventually take a step back and add those storylines to Azura and the farmlands. We want to start introducing those storylines in Windless Woods, and Wendy and I spent a long time planning out the story. It starts simple, but eventually turns pretty epic near the end, and it'll be the first time the player gets to be a true hero by defeating a threat that could actually destroy Tyrowin if left unchecked. I have to keep reminding myself that the player can actually be a real hero without being the chosen one, which is a trope that I'm absolutely sick of in games. So this week I finished up the storyline block out and started implementing the first few characters. I don't want to spoil too much, but we have a large bandit camp right at the entrance of the woods. The leader here is Simon the Rude, named by a Patreon supporter from the Name in the Game tier. Simon isn't very nice, as you could probably guess. If you happen to have defeated another specific bandit leader earlier in the game, he'll be even more rude about you showing up in his camp. But either way, he challenges you to a fight. If you defeat him, you can move along and he'll give you a key to one of the cages in the camp where they've locked up a prisoner. Of course, a true hero of Tyrowin would rescue this prisoner, which will set you on the storyline quest in the Windless Woods. Next, I began working on the dialogue for a group of treasure hunter NPCs in the zone. 2 of these treasure hunters are missing and would probably be very grateful if you rescued them. And that's about it. We don't have a public date yet for the next update, but we'll be sure to let you know as soon as we're ready. And I guess I should probably warn you that we may have to downscope the new combat stuff a bit, or release it in smaller chunks with the new team dynamic. This kind of stuff happens, unfortunately, but sometimes it does inspire us to find even better, more creative solutions to the problem, so don't worry too much. Thanks for watching, and please let me know in the comments if you prefer this sort of devlog format over the more podcast-like style where I have Lewis in here with me. Those videos are much easier to make as we simply just write out an outline and then start chatting, but I definitely get that taking the time to plan out the entire video and writing a script makes for better content. I'm willing to do that for you guys if you enjoy it. See you next time. Bye.